He only wanted silence, a break from the noise of a life that had already taken too much. But what he found on the edge of that forgotten lake would change everything he believed about lost redemption and what survives when hope is gone. Stay until the end, because when the truth surfaces, it will shake more than the water. Like, subscribe and share where you're watching from if you still believe small acts can save entire worlds. Before sunrise at Lake Alder, Darnell Price, a solitary black man in his early 50s, parked his rusted blue Ford by the water's edge. The morning mist rolled like slow smoke across the lake, swallowing the pine line on the opposite bank. He stepped out quietly, the air cold enough to bite through the seams of his old work jacket. For a long moment, he just stood there, hands buried in his pockets, watching his breath vanish. Behind him, his brindle shepherd Coda leapt from the truck bed with a low grunt shaking off the dew. They came here every morning, man and dog, walking the narrow trails before the world woke. The lake was Darnell's escape from a town that had already forgotten him, a place where names like his used to be whispered instead of welcomed. He used to be someone, a machinist with steady hands, a father who tucked his daughter in before night shift, a husband who made promises. Now, it was just him and Coda, the only soul that still looked at him like he mattered. The fog carried the smell of wet earth, and beneath it something faintly sour like rot. Darnell frowned, pausing mid-step. Coda froze to his ears pricking. The shepherd let out a low growl that vibrated through the still air. "What is it?" boy Darnell whispered. Coda turned toward the reeds, muscles tense, nostrils flaring. Then it came a thin, broken whimper, muffled under layers of mist and mud. It was soft at first, like wind through cattails, then sharp, desperate. Darnell felt it more than heard it. He motioned for Coda to stay and stepped carefully through the tall grass. The reeds brushed against his coat, damp and cold, the ground sucking at his boots with each step. He followed the sound, heart tightening with every cry. The fog shifted, and then he saw her. The mother dog was trapped, half submerged in mud. Her neck was jammed deep inside a cracked plastic jug, her muzzle bloody from struggling. Tangled fishing line coiled around her back legs, cutting deep into the fur. Her body trembled with exhaustion, and beside her 2 tiny pups pawed weakly at the earth, half buried, but still fighting to breathe. Darnell's stomach turned. "Oh Lord," he whispered. He crouched low, hands steady, though his heart wasn't. The sight clawed at something deep inside him, something he thought he'd buried with time. That helplessness, that look of pain and pride mixed together. The dog saw him and let out a warning growl, soft but defiant, still guarding her young. Even drowning in fear, she wouldn't surrender. "Easy now," he murmured. "I ain't gonna hurt you." He had seen courage before in men in battle, in backbreaking work, but never like this. The dog's ribs rose and fell like broken wings, her eyes glassy, yet still burning with fight. Darnell took a slow breath. He glanced back. Coda was standing at the tree line, silent, head tilted, amber eyes fixed on the scene. "Stay, boy," Darnell said. "It's okay." The shepherd sat, but didn't take his eyes off them. Darnell knelt, reaching toward the mother. The plastic jug scraped against her teeth as she tried to pull free, but the fishing line tightened, digging deeper into her legs. He could see where the mud had hardened around her body, anchoring her to the earth. She must have been there all night, maybe longer. He knew if he didn't move fast, the morning would end with silence. "Hold still, girl," he said softly. "Let me help." The dog's body jerked, and for a moment he thought she'd bite, but her strength gave out. Her head dropped, and a small sound escaped her, half growl, half cry. He took out his old pocket knife, its wooden handle worn smooth. He'd carried it since the factory days when he used to fix what others broke. Now he hoped it still had some good left. He pressed the blade under the line, sawing carefully. The water was cold, numbing his fingers. When the line snapped, she jerked her leg free, but the movement twisted her further into the jug. "Damn," he muttered. He needed to get that off, but the edges had fused with her fur, cutting deep. The pups began crying louder small whimpers that pierced through him. Then came twist one. In his mourning through the cattails, he realized there was more fishing line looping underwater, tethered to a half-submerged branch. That's why she couldn't move. She wasn't just tangled, she was anchored. Darnell cursed under his breath, plunging his hand into the cold. Mud swallowed his wrist as he felt for the tension. The mother shuddered, whimpering each time he moved. I know. I'm sorry," he whispered. His thumb brushed sharp nylon. One slow cut, then another. The branch shifted, releasing her. For the first time, her body sagged against the mud. "You're okay, girl," he said, but the words were for himself, too. The weight in his chest eased, but only for a second, because that's when twist two struck. The smaller pup pressed closest to her belly, twitched once, then went still. No. Darnell dropped his knife, scooping the tiny thing up in both hands. It wasn't breathing. He rubbed its back, gently desperate voice breaking. "Come on, little one, don't give up." Coda whined behind him, low and uneasy. Then faintly the pup coughed. Just once, a tiny, fragile gasp. Darnell laughed through the shake of it, pulling it close to his chest. That's it, baby. You're tougher than you look." The mother raised her head weakly, eyes softening when she saw her pup move. For a moment, Darnell swore he saw something human in her gaze, a kind of tired gratitude that didn't need words. The sun crept higher, piercing the fog, with pale light painting the lake in silver streaks. Darnell's breath came heavy. His boots soaked his hand, bleeding from the line cut, but he didn't care. He reached out again, wiping mud from the mother's fur. The morning light began to thin the fog, but the chill still clung to the air like a memory that refused to fade. Darnell wiped his muddy hands on his jeans and looked at the wounded mother dog, still struggling against the plastic jug locked around her muzzle. The fishing line was gone, the pups alive, but the jug, thick, cracked, and wedged deep, was still choking the breath out of her. She tried to lick her pups through the jagged edge, but could barely move her tongue without wincing. Coda sat a few feet away, ears lowered, eyes fixed on her trembling body. Darnell knew what that look meant. The dog was running out of time. He crouched again, his breath fogging in front of him, and said softly, "All right, Mama, round two." She flinched at his voice, but her growl was faint now, spent from pain. He took his knife, flicked it open again, and pressed the tip against the brittle plastic near her jaw. The edge slipped once, slicing through a strip of hardened mud, then jammed. He twisted harder, feeling the pressure build. The jug cracked but didn't break. "Damn it," he muttered, shifting his grip. The plastic had molded itself around the shape of her head, cutting deep under the fur. The wrong move could make it worse. He steadied the knife again, pressing near the rim where it met her skin, whispering, "Easy, girl. I'm not here to hurt you." The words barely left his mouth before the blade slipped. A quick sting flared across his wrist. He hissed, pulling back blood, instantly mixing with lake water. The jug's edge had caught him when he lost balance, and the cut was deeper than it first looked. Coda barked once, stepping forward, but Darnell raised a hand to stop him. "It's all right, boy," he said through gritted teeth. He wrapped his sleeve around the wound, ignoring the sting. The mother dog whimpered again, and for a moment Darnell felt like he was staring at something older than pain, something like faith. He leaned closer, ignoring the blood running down his arm. He'd been through worse. Back when the factory still ran, he'd taken steel burns, machine cuts, all kinds of scars that never healed right. This one would just join the collection. He steadied the jug with one hand, gripping the knife with the other. The plastic groaned under pressure, cracking down the middle. A piece snapped off, flying into the mud. "There we go," he said softly, his voice low, trying not to spook her. "One more piece and you're out of this prison." The mother dog let out a weak sound, a cross between a growl and a sob. He froze. Coda's body went still too, muscles tight, his tail rigid. Then it happened. The second twist came swift and wild. The mother, bleeding and weak, lunged forward, teeth flashing through the broken gap, not to bite him, but to shield her pups. Her body hit his chest, knocking him backward into the mud. The pup squealed under her as she curled around them, baring her teeth at him in warning. Darnell lay there, stunned breath knocked out of him, staring up at the gray sky. The pain from his wrist pulsed like fire, but something else burned harder: respect. Even half dying, she still had enough fight left to protect what was hers. "You got spirit," he said, under his breath, sitting up slowly, careful not to startle her again. "All right, Mama, I get it. You're their soldier." The jug still clung to her jaw, half split, but cutting deeper now. She was suffocating faster, every breath raspy, her eyes wild with confusion and pain. He couldn't leave her like this. "We're not quitting," he murmured. He dug into his pocket, pulling out the thin coil of wire he used for fishing repairs. It wasn't much, but if he could loop it around the crack and pull the jug apart, he might save her without hurting her more. He crawled closer, step by step, whispering low to calm her. "It's okay, girl. You can fight me later. Right now, we're fighting this thing." His voice shook not from fear, but from something deeper, an ache that came from seeing someone refuse to give up. Coda stayed silent, watching like a sentry, ready if things went bad. The mother's breathing grew shallower, each exhale sounding like air through a torn whistle. Darnell hooked the wire around the jug's edge, tugged once, twice, then braced it with both hands. The jug bent with a high-pitched snap, splitting at the seam. He yanked it away, tossing it into the mud, and immediately stepped back. The dog gasped, collapsing onto her side chest, heaving violently as air rushed into her lungs for the first time in hours. Her pup scrambled over her, licking her muzzle, squealing in relief. Darnell exhaled so hard he almost laughed. "You did it," he whispered. "You damn well did it." He didn't move for a moment, just watched her breathe, her ribs rising faster now, the rhythm of something coming back to life. The blood on her neck mixed with his own, where he'd bled onto her fur. It looked like they'd both paid for the victory. "See, Coda," he said softly, "she ain't ordinary." Coda wagged his tail, once cautious, his gaze gentle now. Darnell slowly approached again, holding his hands open. "I'm not gonna touch you, girl. Just checking you're still with me." The dog didn't growl this time. She blinked, exhausted head resting on the mud. The pups pressed against her stomach, suckling weakly. The air grew warmer as the fog thinned, and for the first time sunlight touched the surface of the lake. Darnell looked at his bleeding wrist, then at the small family before him. He'd woken up that morning just a man walking a dog, but now he was knee-deep in something sacred, life and pain intertwined, like two hands that wouldn't let go. He sat back, the ache in his chest heavier than the wound. The world didn't notice their little war against death, but here on this forgotten patch of earth, something had shifted. He reached out one last time, letting his fingers brush the damp fur near her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You and your babies. You did good." The morning sun had started to climb above the tree line, melting the edges of the fog until Lake Alder shone like glass. Darnell sat back in the mud, blood still trickling from his wrist, watching the mother dog breathe. Her chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, each inhale sounding like gravel through a cracked pipe. The jug was gone, the fishing line cut, but her body trembled with exhaustion, and the pups, three tiny shapes covered in dirt, pressed themselves against her side, too young to know how close they had come to losing her. Coda stood beside Darnell, panting lightly, eyes darting between his master and the wounded family. "We did good, boy," Darnell whispered, voice hoarse, but he knew it wasn't over. The mother's head sagged lower, her eyes rolling half shut, the muscles in her neck twitching in slow, uneven rhythm. He leaned forward, touching her shoulder gently. "Hey, stay with me, Mama," he said softly, wiping mud from her face. Her body jerked once, a small spasm, and then went still. Darnell froze. The sound of the lake faded, swallowed by silence. He pressed his hand to her ribs, no movement. Her eyes stared blankly ahead, glassy and far away. No, 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 he breathed, panic rising like a flood. He put a hand under her neck, trying to lift it, but her head hung heavy. Don't you quit on me now. He had seen this before too many times, life flickering out in front of him. Men at the factory, one accident too many. His own wife in the hospital, her chest still the machines screaming as doctors failed to bring her back. Not again, not like this. He pressed both palms against the mother dog's ribs and started pushing, counting under his breath, his pulse hammering against his temples. 1, 2, 3. The mud around her chest rippled with every push. Come on, girl, breathe. He tilted her head, cleared her mouth as best he could, and kept pressing. The pups whimpered, crawling over his arm, crying in small, broken squeaks. He could feel their panic like electricity in his hands. He refused to stop. Come on, you stubborn girl, he muttered. You got babies waiting. The sky felt too bright now, the light too sharp, burning through the mist like a cruel truth. Darnell pressed harder. His wrist throbbed from the cut, each motion sending a jolt of pain up his arm, but he didn't care. Sweat mixed with blood on his skin. Breathe, he shouted finally, and the sound echoed over the lake like a prayer torn apart. Coda barked sharply, one quick commanding sound, then moved closer, his nose pressing against the mother's cheek. Darnell stopped, panting, his hands trembling. He lowered his forehead to hers, whispering, Please not like this. Then it happened, the first twist. The faint rise of her chest stopped completely. Darnell froze. The pups fell silent, as if they knew. The mother's eyes stayed open, the last bit of light fading from them. The silence felt endless, pressing down like a weight too heavy to bear. He sat there numb, the smell of wet dirt filling his lungs. He wanted to scream, but no sound came. Then beside him, Coda moved. The shepherd leaned forward, licking the mother's muzzle gently once, then again and again, slow and deliberate. Darnell barely noticed at first, lost in the fog of defeat. But something shifted. The pup nearest to the mother twitched its paw, bumping against her chest. Coda licked her again, whining softly this time, as if begging her to return. Darnell blinked, frowning. Coda! Stop, boy! He didn't finish. The mother's paw moved, just barely like a ripple across water. Then her throat rattled with a low, wet sound, a gasp trying to find its way home. Her body shuddered once, twice, then air rushed through her lungs in a harsh, broken wheeze. Darnell's eyes widened. Oh, you gotta be kidding me, he whispered. Coda barked once, triumphant tail wagging as if he had just pulled off a miracle. The second twist had come not from the man, but from the dog. Darnell dropped to his knees again, pressing his ear close to her mouth. She was breathing uneven, shallow, but real. He laughed under his breath, a cracked, disbelieving sound. You brought her back, he said, looking at Coda. You damn angel, you did it. Coda wagged his tail harder, his eyes bright, his entire body trembling with excitement. The pup started crying again, but this time the sound was different, hopeful, alive. Darnell slid his arms under the mother dog, lifting her gently. She was heavier than she looked, her wet fur clinging to his shirt, her heartbeat faint but steady against his chest. I got you, he murmured. You're not dying here, you hear me? Coda walked beside him, close enough to touch his shoulder, brushing Darnell's leg as they moved. Each step through the mud felt like pushing through memory, through all the times he'd tried to save what couldn't be saved. But this time, he refused to lose. When he reached a dry patch of grass near the truck, he laid her down carefully, setting the pups beside her. They huddled against her body, tiny cries softening as warmth returned to their world. Darnell sat back, wiping his forehead, his pulse still racing. He watched Coda sniff each pup, licking the smallest one clean. Good boy, Darnell said, quietly. You keep doing what I can't. He tore a strip from his undershirt, wrapped it around his wrist, and checked the mother's breathing again. It was stronger now, still shaky, but rhythmic. The blood from her muzzle had slowed. He could see where the jug's edge had cut through deep, but not fatal. She'd heal if she could rest. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of pine and mud and something else, something new, something like grace. Darnell looked out at the lake, the sunlight glittering across it. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He thought of the people he'd lost: his wife, his little girl who'd moved away, the brother who stopped calling. All the ones he couldn't save. Maybe this was the universe's way of giving him one more shot, one more soul to protect. Coda lay beside the mother, now his chin resting near her paw, his amber eyes steady, never leaving her side. Darnell smiled faintly. "You two," he said, shaking his head. "You're gonna make me believe again, aren't you?" The pups nestled deeper into their mother's fur, their small bodies finally still. The wind had picked up by the time Darnell gathered enough dry grass and bark to start a small fire near the truck. The sun had risen higher, turning the lake from silver to soft gold, and the air smelled like thawing mud and smoke. The mother dog lay wrapped in an old flannel shirt he'd pulled from the seat of his truck, her body trembling less now, but still fragile, her ribs visible beneath wet fur. The pups slept close against her tiny bellies, rising and falling with uneven rhythm. Coda lay beside them, chin on his paws, every sense still alert, though his eyes half closed. Darnell crouched by the fire, watching the small flames flicker against the backdrop of morning. He'd torn another piece from his undershirt to clean his wrist. The bleeding mostly stopped, but the ache had settled deep. He looked over at the family he'd pulled from the water and shook his head. "You're tough ones, I'll give you that," he murmured, stirring the ashes with a stick. "But you need food if you're gonna make it." He reached into his backpack, pulling out a half-eaten protein bar, breaking it into tiny pieces. He mixed them with water in his palm, turning it into a soft paste. Crawling closer, he whispered, "Here, Mama, try this. You gotta eat something." The mother opened her eyes, weakly watching him, through a haze of exhaustion. He could see pain still gripping her body. But worse than that, he saw the hollow look of someone who'd stopped expecting to be saved. "Come on now," he urged. "Don't give up on me yet." He placed the mixture near her nose, but she turned away. The pup stirred one, letting out a small squeak, nuzzling closer. Darnell frowned, his chest tightening. He'd seen that look before in his wife's eyes, during her final days when the doctor said they couldn't do more. That same quiet surrender that broke him back then. And now it was here again, staring out of this animal's fading gaze. He clenched his jaw, shaking his head. "Not again," he muttered. "You don't get to quit, not after all this." He dipped his fingers into the water, letting drops fall onto her tongue. She licked once, reflex more than will, then went still. He tried again, but nothing. The fire crackled behind him, its warmth spreading through the damp morning, but it couldn't reach her. He felt anger rise, not at her, but at the world, at whatever cruel force kept testing how much one heart could take. "You fought too hard to just lay down now," he whispered. Coda stirred, standing up and walking toward them. The shepherd's movements were slow, deliberate, as if he understood the weight of the moment. He sniffed the mother, then turned to Darnell, tilting his head slightly. "Yeah, I know," Darnell said softly. "She's fading." He looked down at Coda, his old companion, who had been through everything with him: lonely nights, lost jobs, and the kind of silence that gnawed at a man's soul. The shepherd's eyes glinted in the firelight, full of something Darnell had forgotten: faith. "You want to try?" he asked under his breath, not expecting an answer. But Coda didn't hesitate. He turned, trotted to the truck bed, and rummaged through the pile of old gear until he found it, his favorite stick, worn smooth at the ends from years of fetch. Darnell watched, confused at first, as Coda carried the stick back carefully in his mouth, tail low. The shepherd walked right up to the mother dog, laid the stick beside her paw, and stepped back. The gesture was simple, pure, and for reasons Darnell couldn't explain, powerful. The mother opened her eyes, focusing on the stick, as if drawn by some quiet memory of play, of freedom, of life before pain. Her paw twitched, barely grazing the wood. Coda let out a soft whine, crouching lower tail brushing the dirt once, twice. Darnell held his breath. Then it happened. The first twist turned into the second before he could blink. The mother lifted her head slow and shaky, her nose brushing the stick. Her breathing deepened, a low rumble escaping her chest. The pup stirred at the sound, crawling toward her belly again. She shifted slightly, curling around them, her eyes clearer now, less clouded by exhaustion. Darnell stared in disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. He reached into the pack again, broke off another piece of protein bar, and set it near her paw. This time, she sniffed it. Then with effort, she licked once, twice, swallowing the tiny bit. "That's it, girl," he said, voice breaking with relief. "That's it, keep going." Coda sat beside her, posture proud, but gentle, his eyes never leaving her face. Darnell felt his throat tighten. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen something so small, so fragile shift the world around him. It wasn't just an animal's instinct. It was grace wrapped in fur and dirt, reminding him that even the broken could choose to rise again. He looked toward the horizon where sunlight kissed the treetops, the day finally alive. He hadn't prayed in years, but something inside him stirred now, quiet and sure. Maybe this was what faith looked like, not the loud kind from sermons or books, but the kind that lived in moments like this, in the steady fire of survival, in the loyalty of one creature saving another. He tossed a few more sticks onto the fire, the flames flaring higher, warmth spreading across the clearing. The mother ate a few more bites, each one slow but certain. The pups suckled greedily, now their cries turning softer. Darnell sat back, exhaustion mixing with peace. He watched Coda lie down beside the family, curling himself around them like a guardian. "You've done enough for today," partner Darnell whispered. The sun had barely climbed above the ridge when Darnell heard the first low growl echo from the far side of the lake. He froze his hand halfway to the fire as a cold gust rippled through the reeds, carrying with it a sound that was too deep to belong to the mother. Coda's ears snapped upright, his body shifting from relaxed to rigid in an instant. The shepherd growled once low in his throat, the kind of sound that vibrated more than it spoke. Darnell looked up, scanning the gray stretch of shoreline until the mist moved, reshaping itself into something darker. A shape emerged, broad, heavy, and moving, slow. Darnell's first thought was a coyote, but this wasn't the slinking, wary kind of wild. This one walked with purpose, muscles coiled tight beneath a mangled coat. When it drew close enough for the light to catch, Darnell saw the scars, long white lines along the muzzle, one ear half gone, eyes the color of rusted metal. The male dog stopped 20 feet away, tail stiff, shoulders squared, his focus locked on the small fire the pups and the man crouched between them. The growl deepened. Darnell muttered under his breath, "Well, damn, you must be the dad." He kept his voice even, not wanting to stir fear into the air. The mother stirred weakly behind him, a low whine escaping her throat. The male responded with a bark sharp enough to slice through the quiet. He took a step forward, his paw sinking into the mud, and Darnell saw his teeth glint in the sunlight. "Easy now," Darnell said, softly, raising one hand in peace. "Ain't nobody here to hurt her." But the male didn't understand words. What he saw was a stranger crouched too close to his broken family, a foreign smell, a human silhouette. His snarl curled into something primal, a threat older than language. Coda moved before Darnell could blink. The shepherd stood between him and the male, tail lowered, but wagging slow, steady. His body wasn't tense. It was balanced, calm, but ready. Darnell whispered, "Good boy, easy." He had seen Coda like this once before, years back, when a stranger had cornered them behind a gas station after dark. Coda didn't fight unless there was no other way. But when he stood like that, shoulders forward, ears half back, eyes locked, he could stop the world from taking another step. The two dogs stared at each other, breathing heavy. Darnell didn't move. The mother whimpered again, her paw twitching toward the pups. The sound cut through the tension like glass. The male's eyes flickered anger, giving way to confusion. He took another step forward, but slower now. Darnell spoke again, quieter this time. "That's right, big fella. She's here. She's safe." The male's nose twitched, catching the familiar scent. His head tilted, the growl fading to a rumble. Darnell saw the moment recognition hit the way his tail dropped slightly, the stiffness melting from his legs. "You know her," Darnell whispered. "You came for her." But then, just as quickly, the dog's eyes flashed again, catching sight of the human kneeling close to his mate. The bark came out harsher this time, defensive, confused, desperate. He lunged forward, mud flying from his paws. Darnell flinched, heart racing, but Coda didn't move. The shepherd held his ground, taking one slow step forward, tail wagging again, slower this time, a careful rhythm of reassurance. His eyes softened, head tilted low, the language of dogs saying everything that needed saying. "I'm not your enemy." The male stopped short, chest heaving. The two dogs stood inches apart, now breath-mingling tension trembling in the air like static. Darnell didn't dare breathe. The fire cracked behind him, a spark snapping across the logs. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then the strangest thing happened. Coda looked back at Darnell, then at the mother, then at the male again, and let out a low, almost playful bark. Just one. The male froze, blinking. Coda barked again, tail wagging wider, now his body lowering slightly as if inviting trust. The response wasn't immediate. The male's nostrils flared, his eyes narrowing, still weighing danger against hope. Then slowly he let out a breath, a low, uncertain sound, and took a single step forward. Darnell could almost feel the shift in the air, something small and unspoken passing between them. He whispered, "That's it, boy. Let him through." Coda stepped aside, tail still moving. The male approached the mother, his movements cautious but determined. The closer he got, the softer his posture became. He sniffed the air, then her fur, and the moment his nose brushed her head, a whine escaped him that broke through the silence like a confession. The mother lifted her head weakly, eyes flickering open. The sound she made was quiet, but it carried everything: recognition, relief, forgiveness. She pressed her muzzle against his, and the two stayed like that, still, and trembling, the world shrinking down to that single touch. Darnell exhaled slowly, a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You found her," he said softly. "Took your time, but you made it." The pups woke with tiny cries, crawling toward the sound of their parents. The male licked the closest one clumsily, his movements both protective and uncertain. Darnell felt something shift inside him again, some corner of his heart he'd kept locked for years. He glanced at Coda, who sat watching quietly, tail sweeping the ground in slow contentment. "You did good," partner Darnell murmured. "Didn't need teeth to win that fight." Coda blinked once, his gaze soft but proud. The fire's smoke rose higher now, curling into the pale sky like a slow prayer. The mother settled her head against the male's shoulder, and the pups nestled closer, their tiny whimpers fading into soft breathing. Darnell leaned back against the truck tire, his muscles unclenching for the first time since sunrise. The ache in his wrist pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, but the pain felt distant, now unimportant. The world had righted itself in front of his eyes, one small miracle at a time. The male turned once toward Darnell, eyes still wary, but calmer now. Gratitude hidden somewhere beneath the caution. Darnell met his gaze, nodding once. "Ain't no harm here, friend," he said quietly. "You just take care of her." The male gave a short huff, almost like agreement, before curling beside his mate. The sight held Darnell longer than he meant it to. The way they fit together, the brokenness, the scars, the stubborn will to keep breathing. It reminded him of nights long gone, when his wife would fall asleep on the couch beside him after another long shift, their hands still touching despite exhaustion. He turned back to the fire, adding another stick, the flames catching with a faint hiss. Coda came to sit beside him again, resting his head on Darnell's knee. "Looks like love don't die easy," Darnell whispered. "Guess we needed to see that today." The wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the sound of quiet water lapping the shore. The lake reflected everything: the fire, the dogs, the man, and for a rare moment, all three seemed to belong to the same still world. The fog that had once cloaked Lake Alder was gone, burned away by the slow heat of morning, leaving behind air that smelled like ash pine and second chances. The fire near Darnell's truck had burned low, its smoke drifting thin and silver above the reeds. The mother dog lay curled beside her pups, their small bodies pressed together like puzzle pieces, and the scarred male rested near her flank. His head lifted, but his body relaxed at last. The tension that had held the air so tight was gone, though not forgotten, replaced by something quieter, cautious trust. Darnell sat a few feet away, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the scarred stray who had nearly torn through him an hour ago. He still couldn't believe how fast everything had changed. 1 minute there had been growls and mud and the promise of pain, and now there was this stillness, the kind that could only exist after survival. He reached into his coat pocket for the old knife, the same one that had freed the mother from the fishing line, and the jug, the same one that had sliced his wrist open when he got too close. He studied it for a moment, thumb tracing the dull edge of dried blood along its blade. The knife had been his only certainty for years. In the town he came from, you didn't survive without being ready for what waited in the dark. But this morning wasn't about survival anymore. It was about trust. He exhaled, feeling the air shift in his chest, then placed the knife on the ground beside him. "I'm done fighting," he said quietly, though no one had asked him to speak. Coda raised his head at the sound, his amber eyes meeting Darnell's. The shepherd gave a short grunt, a sound somewhere between understanding and approval, then laid his head back down on his paws. Across the clearing, the male stray watched every move, his gaze wary but curious. His ribs showed under his coarse fur, his scars pale against the sun. He sniffed the air once, then twice, catching again the familiar scent that had brought him back the smell of his mate, the soft trace of milk from his pups. The sound that left him next wasn't a growl, but a low, broken whine, a sound of memory and recognition. That was the first twist quiet, but heavy the moment when fear gave way to something deeper than instinct. Darnell stayed still, barely breathing. He didn't want to scare him off again. The male took one hesitant step forward, then another, mud sticking to his paws. His tail was still not wagging, but not raised in threat either. Coda stayed motionless, body coiled, but not tense, ready to step in if needed, but wise enough to let the world play its part. The stray's eyes flicked from Darnell to the mother, then back again, searching for meaning in faces that didn't speak his language. Darnell swallowed hard, the scar on his wrist throbbing. He knew he had one chance to prove he wasn't danger. Slowly he reached out and pushed the knife farther away, letting it clatter softly against the grass. The sound drew the stray's attention. Darnell lifted both hands, palms open. "No more steel, friend," he said softly, his voice low and even, "just blood bone and truth." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of iron and smoke toward the dog. The stray's nose twitched. He could smell the fresh wound on Darnell's wrist, the metallic echo of injury mixed with earth and fire. The air thickened, a quiet hum of tension and decision. Darnell didn't move. He held his hand steady, even as a thin drop of blood slid down his skin and landed on the dirt. The stray took one step closer. His paws made no sound. The world seemed to hold its breath, even the lake waiting for what would come next. Darnell felt the weight of the animal's stare like heat on his chest. The dog's teeth flashed for a moment, not in anger, but in hesitation. Then, without warning, he closed the distance. His nose brushed Darnell's wrist, once inhaling the scent of blood. Darnell didn't flinch. He stayed exactly where he was, letting the moment decide whether it would break him or bless him. The stray licked once, slow, deliberate. The roughness of his tongue scraped against the torn skin, cleaning it the way animals tend to wounds. Darnell blinked, his throat tightening. That was the second twist, and it hit harder than any blade could. In that single act, something passed between them, a truce, an understanding that no words could name. "You're something else," Darnell whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of it. The stray stepped back, sitting down heavily on the ground, eyes softer now. The fire crackled, once its last ember flaring and dying. Coda lifted his head again, wagging his tail once, as if to mark the moment complete. The lake shimmered behind them, still and quiet, reflecting the fragile peace they had built. Darnell wiped his wrist with the edge of his sleeve, not to hide the blood, but to honor what had been shared. He'd grown up believing scars made a man weaker, reminders of where he'd failed to defend himself. But maybe they weren't weakness at all. Maybe they were proof of what he'd survived, of what he'd chosen not to fight. He leaned back, stretching his legs, eyes still on the stray. "Guess we understand each other now," he said quietly. The dog tilted his head, as if he'd caught the meaning, then looked back at his family. The mother was awake again, her breathing steady, her eyes watching them both. She didn't look afraid anymore. Darnell smiled faintly. "You picked a good one, girl," he said. "He's got your fire." The pups yawned in their sleep, small sounds barely louder than the crackle of burned wood. The clearing felt warmer than it should have, touched by a peace that belonged to none of them alone. Darnell sat there for a long while, letting the silence stretch his hands still throbbing, but his heart calm. Coda came closer, nudging his arm, gently resting his head on Darnell's shoulder. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he murmured. Coda's tail wagged once. The moment felt sacred in its simplicity. A man, two dogs, and a fragile family tied together by the strange mercy of chance. Darnell thought of his late wife again, how she used to say that love was just trust wrapped in patience. He hadn't understood it then, not really, but now he did. He reached down and rubbed Coda's neck, the soft fur warm under his fingers. "You did good, boy," he whispered. The stray lifted his head at the sound, ears perked, eyes bright in the sunlight. He didn't move closer this time, but he didn't turn away either. It was enough. Darnell looked toward the lake, its calm surface broken only by a single ripple spreading outward, widening until it touched every edge of the shore. He smiled faintly, feeling that ripple inside himself too. Life, fragile and stubborn, had a way of returning when least expected. He had come to this lake to find quiet, maybe to hide, but instead he'd found something alive, something wild and forgiving. The morning breeze carried the faint smell of pine sap and wet earth. Darnell closed his eyes for a moment, breathing it in his body, heavy, but his spirit light. When he opened them again, the stray was still there, watching. "We're good now," Darnell said softly. "You take care of yours, and I'll take care of mine." The dog blinked once, slow, deliberate, as if sealing the unspoken pact. The wind shifted, rustling the trees, and the lake reflected their peace. Temporary, maybe, but real, and real was enough. The morning had turned golden, the air soft and warm, as if the lake itself had forgiven the world for what it had done. Darnell sat near the embers of the dying fire, wrist wrapped in his torn sleeve, watching the fragile family breathe. The scarred male had curled protectively around his mate, his heavy head resting across her shoulders, while the pups slept in the hollow of their mother's belly, small, safe, and unaware of how close they had all come to death. Coda dozed beside Darnell, but even in rest his ears flicked with every sound. The world was quiet except for the steady hum of insects rising from the grass and the faint slap of the lake against the rocks. For the first time in years, Darnell felt something close to peace, but it was the uneasy kind, the kind that came only after you'd fought too long to trust it. He knew this couldn't last. Life never gave anything for free, not even mercy. He rubbed his temple, looking toward the lake. The water shimmered like glass, and beyond it, the forest waited vast, ancient, and dangerous. He knew there were coyotes in those woods, maybe even bears, and the mother was too weak to move fast if danger came again. He turned back toward her just as she stirred her head, lifting slowly. Her eyes were clearer now, no longer clouded by fear, and her breathing came easier. The scarred male shifted beside her, standing halfway, sniffing the air as if urging her to follow. Darnell straightened, sensing what was about to happen. "You think you can do it, girl," he murmured. She blinked at him, then at the water, her gaze distant but determined. The pull of the lake, the instinct to return to what she knew was written in her bones. She wanted to go home. Darnell pushed himself to his feet, muscles aching, and nodded. "All right then, let's get you back where you belong." He stepped closer, crouching beside her. "Easy now. Take it slow." The mother placed one paw forward, trembling as it sank into the dirt. Her back leg wobbled, the muscle weak from strain. The scarred male stayed beside her, nudging her flank gently, his low whine echoing like encouragement. She tried again, and for a moment she stood tall and trembling, her ribs stretching against her skin. The pups whimpered, sensing the change, their tiny cries filling the space with nervous hope. Darnell took a cautious step back, giving her room. "That's it, Mama, one step at a time." She moved forward, dragging her hind leg through the mud. Then her strength faltered. Her body shuddered, and she collapsed hard, the sound dull and heavy. That was the first twist, sudden and cruel, her chin hitting the ground as a weak cry escaped her throat. The male barked sharply, circling her, his fear raw and unfiltered. Darnell dropped to his knees beside her, reaching out without thinking. "No, no, no, come on, girl. Don't give up now." The mother tried to lift her head, her body trembling, but she couldn't find her footing. Darnell placed a hand against her side, feeling her heartbeat race beneath her ribs. It wasn't weakness that held her down. It was exhaustion, the kind that didn't just live in the body, but in the soul. "You've made it this far," he said softly. "You can make it one step more." Coda, now awake, stood beside him, watching. His head tilted slightly, eyes darting from Darnell to the mother as if reading the space between them. He took one step forward, his paws silent on the grass. "Stay back, boy," Darnell whispered. "She's scared." But Coda didn't listen. He moved closer, his tail hanging low, his eyes calm and focused. He sniffed the mother once, then nudged her gently with his nose. When she didn't react, he nudged harder, pressing his shoulder against hers. Darnell frowned, not understanding, until it happened, the second twist that no one saw coming. Coda crouched down, pressing his body beneath the mother's chest, lifting with quiet strength. The mother staggered, her legs sliding against the dirt, but Coda pushed harder, muscles straining, tail stiff with effort. Inch by inch, he helped her stand. Darnell stared, breath caught in his throat. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking. The mother found her footing again, her head rising, breath ragged but steady. Coda held still, braced beneath her weight until she steadied herself. The scarred male barked once, a low sound filled with recognition and awe. The moment hung there, fragile and bright like the first light after a storm. The mother took another step, this one steadier, her paw landing just shy of the lake's edge. She paused, nostrils flaring, taking in the smell of home, the cool scent of water and moss and safety. Coda stepped back slowly, letting her walk on her own. Darnell felt a lump rise in his throat. He'd seen men pull each other from wreckage, soldiers drag friends from fire, but he had never seen anything so selfless, so silent, so sure. The mother turned her head toward Coda, eyes softening. No sound passed between them, but the look said everything. Gratitude, trust, understanding. She limped closer to the lake, each step slow but certain. The scarred male at her side, their movements synchronized by instinct. The pups, too small to follow, yipped from behind, their cries sharp with confusion. Darnell hurried back, scooping them gently into his arms. "Don't worry, little ones," he said softly. "She's not leaving you." He carried them to the lake's edge, where the mother stood waiting. The pups wriggled in his arms, their small bodies warm against his chest. He knelt beside her, setting them down one by one. The mother nosed each of them, licking the mud from their fur, her strength growing with every touch. Coda stood beside Darnell, tail moving slowly, proud but tired. "You've done something today, boy," Darnell said quietly. "Something real." The lake shimmered in front of them, calm and endless. The mother stepped forward, her paws dipping into the cool shallows. The scarred male followed the water rising to his chest. The pups waded in last, squealing at the cold before settling close to their mother's legs. For a moment they all stood there, framed by light and water. A family whole again. Darnell felt his chest tighten something inside him, breaking and mending at the same time. He reached down, resting his hand on Coda's head. "Guess you taught us both how to stand again," he whispered. The shepherd leaned into his palm, pressing his weight there solid and loyal. Darnell stayed like that, watching as the family began to move deeper into the lake, slow and graceful. The ripples followed them outward, stretching until they touched the far shore, scattering sunlight into patterns that danced across the surface. When the last of their shapes blurred into the water, he exhaled and stood. His wrist ached, his back throbbed, but he didn't feel tired. He felt alive. Coda circled him once, brushing against his leg before settling at his feet. The water shimmered under the late morning sun. The mist gone completely now, replaced by light that spread like forgiveness over the rippling lake. Darnell stood with his boots half in the water mud, clinging to the soles, watching the family drift slowly into the shallows. The mother, still weak but moving with a fragile grace, stayed close to the scarred male. The pups paddled between them, tiny heads bobbing squeaks, echoing over the surface. Coda stood beside Darnell, tail swaying lazily, his amber eyes fixed on them, as if making sure every heartbeat still belonged to life. Darnell breathed deep, the smell of pine and damp earth filling his chest. He had seen broken things his whole life, machines and men alike, but never had he seen something this simple turn into something this holy. "They're gonna be all right," he murmured. His own voice sounded strange to him, rough from smoke and emotion. Coda glanced up at him, his tongue lolling out as if he agreed. Darnell smiled faintly and turned toward the truck. "Let's get you cleaned up, partner. You've done more than any man could ask." But as he took his first step back toward the fire pit, Coda froze. The shepherd's ears twitched, his nose lifting toward the air. He let out a short, sharp bark and bolted back toward the shore, splashing through the shallows. "Coda!" "What is it?" Darnell shouted, stumbling after him. The shepherd reached the edge where the grass met the water and stopped dead. Darnell followed his gaze and his stomach dropped. One of the pups, the smallest of the three, had washed back towards the shore, lying limp against the mud. Its tiny chest wasn't moving. The mother, still out in the water, barked once, a sound high and broken, her voice cracking through the still air. The other pups cried, circling her legs, but she couldn't reach the shore fast enough. The distance was too great, her body too weak. Darnell's pulse hammered in his ears. "No," he whispered, running forward, splashing through the water to the shore. He scooped the tiny thing into his hands. It was cold, too cold. He pressed it gently between his palms, rubbing in small circles to warm it. "Come on, little one," he murmured. "Don't you dare quit now." The pup didn't move. Its body was slack, tongue slightly visible, eyes half shut. Darnell felt panic rise in his throat, but before he could speak again, Coda stepped closer, nudging his elbow as if asking to take over. Darnell hesitated, but the shepherd's gaze was steady, determined. "All right, boy," he whispered. "Do what you gotta do." Coda lowered his head, sniffing the pup, once then began licking its face, slow and deliberate. Each stroke was patient, rhythmic, full of something beyond instinct, care, intention, love. Darnell watched, heart pounding, his breath shallow. Coda's tongue brushed over the pup's nose, then its chest, then back to its mouth. "Come on," Darnell said softly. "You can do it." The shepherd didn't stop even when nothing changed. He kept licking his body, trembling with quiet effort. The mother barked again, voice full of panic and pain calling across the lake. That sound, it was a cry not of fear, but of hope, as if she were begging the world not to take one more piece of her. The wind caught her voice and carried it back across the water. Then it happened. The first twist turned into the second before Darnell even realized it. The pup twitched. Once, then again. Its chest rose shallow but real, and a faint squeak escaped its throat. Darnell's eyes widened. "That's it," he whispered, voice cracking. "That's it. Baby, breathe." Coda kept going, licking faster now, his tail starting to move. The pup gasped again, its tiny lungs catching rhythm, and soon it was crying weak but alive. The sound was small, but it was everything. The mother heard it and let out a soft, trembling howl that rolled across the lake like music. The scarred male answered her call, his deep bark echoing back, and together their voices filled the air, a song of relief and reunion. Darnell laughed softly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "You're a damn miracle worker," he told Coda. The shepherd sat down, panting heavily, his fur wet and gleaming in the sunlight. He looked proud, but not smug, just content, as if he'd known all along that the little one would come back. Darnell held the pup close for another moment, feeling its tiny heart flutter against his skin before setting it down near the water's edge. It wobbled, squeaking, then stumbled toward the lake, rejoining the others. The mother moved forward, her head dipping low to meet it halfway. She nosed the pup, licking it once, then pressed it gently beneath her chin. The family closed the circle again, whole once more. Darnell let out a long breath, his body trembling with the release of it. He crouched beside Coda, scratching the shepherd's neck. "You never give up on anything, do you?" he whispered. Coda leaned into the touch, eyes half closed. The sunlight gleamed off his coat, warm and golden, and for the first time since this began, Darnell felt something like grace settle around them both. The world seemed quieter now, not empty, but at peace. The lake rippled gently, the reflections of trees dancing across its surface. The smoke from the fire had drifted higher, a thin trail curling into the sky like a signal to no one in particular. Darnell looked at it and thought of his wife again, how she'd always said the hardest part of life wasn't losing. It was learning how to stay open after you'd already been broken. Maybe that was what this day was teaching him. He had come here to escape people, to avoid the noise, the hurt, the reminder of what he'd lost. But instead he'd found something raw and honest pain that turned into connection loss, that turned into life. He turned to Coda, who had settled down beside him, head resting on his knee. "You did good today," he said quietly. "Better than any of us deserve." The shepherd blinked slowly, the tip of his tail brushing against Darnell's boot. The family of strays was still near the water, the pups playing weakly in the shallows while their parents watched with tired, proud eyes. The smallest pup, the one Coda had saved, wobbled, but kept its balance, letting out a squeal that made Darnell chuckle. "You're a fighter too, huh?" he murmured. The mother turned her head, then meeting Darnell's gaze. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, only calm. She blinked once, slow and deliberate, before lowering her head toward her pups again. It felt like a thank you, quiet and certain. Darnell nodded back, his throat tight. "You're welcome, Mama," he said softly. He stood, finally brushing dirt from his jeans, the ache in his muscles reminding him that he was still alive. The sun had risen higher, scattering gold across the lake like coins thrown in offering. The sun hung high over Lake Alder, now spilling gold over the rippling surface, turning every movement into light. The smoke from Darnell's small fire had faded to a thin wisp that rose straight into the sky and disappeared like breath. The clearing had grown quiet except for the lapping water, the chirp of insects, and the faint rustle of pine needles swaying in the wind. Darnell stood near the shore, watching the family rest. The mother lay on the damp grass, her body curled protectively around her 3 pups, while the scarred male stood just beyond her tail, lifted gaze sweeping the tree line as if searching for threats. The moment was peaceful, but beneath it lay the soft tension of goodbye. Darnell could feel it in the air, the slow drift of something coming to an end. Coda stood beside him, her still damp eyes following the family's every move. "They'll make it now," Darnell said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. "They've got each other." Coda looked up, his tail moving once, as if agreeing. Darnell reached down to scratch behind his ear, fingers sinking into the shepherd's thick fur. He could still feel the faint throb in his wrist, where the scarred stray had licked the wound, sealing that strange bond between man and wild. The cut had stopped bleeding, but the memory burned fresh like something sacred. He turned his gaze back to the lake, where the sunlight glittered off the surface like 1,000 tiny promises. "Guess this is their home again," he murmured, "and we're just visitors." The mother stirred, then lifting her head. Her eyes found his across the clearing. She didn't growl or flinch. Instead, she watched him, her gaze steady and calm. The pups, awake now, crawled over her belly, squeaking softly. The scarred male barked once, a short sound that broke the silence but carried no threat. That was the first twist, gentle and surprising, a farewell. Not in fear, but in gratitude. Darnell smiled faintly, feeling his throat tighten. "You're welcome," he said softly. Though the words were swallowed by the wind, the male turned towards the trees, then glancing once at the mother, as if asking if she was ready. She rose slowly, her movement stronger now. The pups hesitated, confused by the shift, but followed when she took her first step toward the woods. Darnell's chest ached as he watched them. He'd known this moment would come, but knowing didn't make it easier. Coda stepped forward, ears perked, tail low, eyes locked on the family as they moved closer to the tree line. The scarred male stopped halfway, turning back toward Darnell and the shepherd. His gaze was steady, wild, but no longer wary. He barked once more, low and clear, a sound that held no anger, just acknowledgement, a bridge between two worlds. Darnell nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Take care of them." The male turned away, then leading the family onward. The pups stumbled through the grass, tripping over roots, but finding their footing each time. The mother followed close behind, her body brushing against theirs, her tail wagging slowly as if keeping count. The wind shifted again, carrying their scent toward Darnell. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing it in, memorizing it, the smell of fur and earth and rebirth. He didn't want to forget this. He couldn't. When he opened his eyes again, they had reached the edge of the trees. The sunlight caught the scarred male's fur, turning the white marks into silver. He paused one last time, glancing back at Darnell and Coda, and in that brief look, there was something that went beyond understanding, recognition, maybe even respect. Then he disappeared into the shadows of the forest. The mother followed her steps slower, the pups at her heels. She was almost gone when she did something that stopped Darnell cold. She turned her head just once, looking back at him across the water. The reflection of her face rippled against his in the lake's surface, merging for a heartbeat before fading. That was the second twist, quiet and heavy, her silent thank you, lingering longer than any word could have. Darnell swallowed hard, his eyes stinging. He took a step forward, boots sinking into the wet earth. "You're welcome, Mama," he whispered again, the words shaking. Coda stood beside him, his head tilted, ears twitching as if listening to sounds Darnell couldn't hear. The trees rustled softly as the family vanished into the forest. The clearing felt emptier now, the kind of emptiness that wasn't sad, but sacred, like the space left behind after prayer. Darnell let out a long, uneven breath. The fire had gone out completely, leaving only ash and a faint scent of smoke that clung to his clothes. He crouched by the shore, scooping a handful of water, splashing it over his face. The cold bit his skin, grounding him in the moment. When he looked up, Coda was watching him, his expression calm and steady. "They're gone," Darnell said quietly. "You did good, boy. You did real good." Coda sat beside him, tail brushing against the ground. For a long while, neither of them moved. The world was still except for the wind moving through the reeds and the hum of distant insects. Darnell stared at the water, seeing not his reflection, but hers, the mother's eyes, the pup's faces, the strength in their survival. He thought of how much had changed since the cry first cut through the fog that morning. He'd come here a hollow man carrying nothing but guilt and ghosts. Now, somehow, he was leaving with something alive inside him again. The lake glittered under the noon sun, brighter now, almost blinding. The sound of waves against the shore felt softer, like breathing. Darnell stood slowly, stretching his sore back, brushing dirt from his hands. He turned toward Coda, who stood too, the shepherd's gaze still fixed on the place where the family had disappeared. "Come on," Darnell said gently. "Time to head home." Coda didn't move at first. He took one more look toward the trees, ears flicking as if memorizing the scent, the memory, the miracle. Then he turned, following Darnell toward the truck. Each step crunched softly over dry leaves and earth. Darnell paused once before climbing in, looking back over the clearing. The fire pit, the ashes, the scattered paw prints, all of it felt like a story left behind. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You did something good today, old man," he muttered to himself. "Maybe that's enough." Coda jumped into the passenger seat, resting his head on the window ledge, eyes half-closed, tail thumping lightly. Darnell started the engine, the rumble breaking the silence. As they drove off, the sound faded into the wind, leaving the lake quiet once more. The water rippled gently, carrying the last traces of their scent toward the far shore. The forest stood tall and still, hiding its secrets again. The road curved through the pines, sunlight flickering through the branches, and the hum of the old Ford's engine filled the air like a low hymn. Darnell drove slow, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his lap, still sore from the morning's work. Coda sat in the passenger seat, chin on the window frame, his eyes half closed, but alert, the kind of calm that comes only after a storm. The lake shimmered behind them in the rearview mirror, a fading reflection that tugged at something deep inside Darnell. He had come to Lake Alder that morning looking for quiet, maybe even a kind of escape, but what he found instead was a reminder that even the smallest act of compassion could echo louder than grief. He glanced down at his wrist, the makeshift bandage still stained with dried blood. The cut had stopped hurting hours ago, but the skin pulsed faintly beneath it, as if the memory of the stray's touch still lingered there. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Crazy world, huh, boy," he said. Coda thumped his tail once the sound steady and warm. The forest opened to a narrow clearing that overlooked the water, and something in Darnell told him to stop. He eased the truck to the shoulder and killed the engine. The silence that followed was thick and alive, broken only by the sound of waves brushing the rocks below. He stepped out, stretching his sore legs, and inhaled deeply. The scent of pine sap and damp soil filled his lungs. He walked towards the shore boots, crunching over pebbles, Coda trailing behind him. The lake looked different now, brighter somehow, as if it too had exhaled after a long, hard night. The wind moved softly, touching the surface, in small ripples that glinted under the sun. Darnell stood there for a moment, feeling the warmth on his face when something caught his eye, a piece of plastic half buried in the sand near the waterline. He bent down, brushed the dirt away, and froze. It was the jug, the same one that had trapped the mother dog's head. Its rim still cracked its edges, coated with dried mud. The letters on the faded label read "Pure Life," though most of the ink had peeled away. He turned it over in his hand, the sunlight catching the rough surface, reflecting small glimmers of rainbow where the plastic bent. It looked harmless now, almost beautiful, but Darnell could still see the marks it had left on her skin. He ran his thumb along the crack and sighed. "Funny how something made to hold life can take it away," he murmured. Coda sniffed it once, then looked up at him, ears twitching. Darnell stared out at the water, the lake stretching endlessly toward the horizon. He thought of the mother of the scarred male of the pups paddling between them like little ripples of hope. They were out there somewhere, maybe deep in the woods, now safe and free. The world hadn't changed. Not really, trash would still wash up. Storms would still come, but maybe what mattered wasn't changing the whole world, only the piece of it that you could touch. He looked down at the jug again, weighing it in his palm. Then he stepped closer to the water, crouched, and tossed it out across the surface. It hit the lake with a soft splash, spinning once before starting to sink. That was the second twist, quiet and deliberate, the act of letting go. He watched the plastic drift downward until it vanished beneath the sunlight, swallowed by the water that had once been its prison. The ripples spread wide, brushing against the shore, before disappearing, leaving only reflection behind. Darnell stayed there a long time, watching the water settle. Coda came to sit beside him, pressing his body close. Darnell scratched the shepherd's neck, his fingers sliding through damp fur. "You know," he said softly, "I think people are like lakes. We hold too much. Pain, guilt, old things that don't float anymore. Maybe that's why life keeps giving us ways to let go." Coda tilted his head, his golden eyes catching the sun. Darnell chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, I know, you probably just want lunch." But then his voice softened again. "Still, I needed to see that today. Needed to know I could still care about something without it breaking me." He glanced down at his wrist again. The blood had dried to a faint brown line, but when the light hit it, it gleamed faintly, as if something alive pulsed beneath it. "Guess we both got marked by this morning, huh?" he said. "Her blood, my blood, it all kinda mixed there for a while." He thought of his wife again. Her soft laugh, her steady hands, the way she'd always told him that kindness didn't need to be loud to matter. "You change the world one small mercy at a time," she used to say. He'd forgotten that somewhere along the way, buried under the noise and the loneliness, but this morning had reminded him. A cry in the fog, a dog in pain, a hand that reached instead of turned away, that was enough. He turned toward Coda, smiling. "You know something, boy? You might just be the best preacher I ever met." Coda barked once, sharp but friendly as tail sweeping the grass. Darnell laughed quietly. "Yeah, I figured you'd agree." He stood brushing dirt from his jeans and looked out one last time. The lake shone like polished glass, reflecting the sky so clearly it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. He imagined the family somewhere out there, maybe under the trees near the far bank, maybe curled up in a hollow where sunlight filtered through the leaves. They were out of sight now, but not gone. Their story lived here in the water, in the quiet, in the man and dog who had borne witness to it. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small piece of driftwood shaped like a heart. He didn't know when he'd picked it up, maybe when he'd gathered kindling earlier, but now, in his hand, it felt like a keepsake. He tossed it gently into the water, watching it float. "That's for her," he whispered. "For all of them." The wind shifted, carrying his words out over the lake, where they mingled with the soft rush of water and the whisper of trees. He felt lighter as he turned back toward the truck. Each step was easier than the one before. When he reached the cab, Coda had already jumped in, waiting patiently, with his head tilted, as if to say, "You done making peace?" Now Darnell smiled. "Yeah, partner," he said. "I'm done." He climbed in and started the engine. The rumble was comforting, familiar, a reminder that the world kept moving no matter what it carried. As he drove away, sunlight filtered through the windshield, warm against his face. The road wound through the forest, the trees arching overhead like cathedral walls. He rolled the window down, letting the air rush in. The scent of the lake clung to it, wet stone pine life. He thought about what he'd seen that morning and what it meant. Maybe kindness wasn't about saving something so it could owe you. Maybe it was about saving something so you could remember what being human felt like. The wind roared softly in his ears, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel hollow. He felt whole, filled with something that had no name but needed none. The world outside gleamed brighter, sharper, more alive. The sun dipped behind the trees as the truck rolled down the dirt road, and Lake Alder disappeared from view. Darnell looked in the rearview mirror one last time, saw the glint of light on the water, and smiled. "Goodbye, Mama," he whispered. "You showed me how to breathe again." The words drifted away, swallowed by the hum of the tires and the music of wind. Ahead, the horizon opened wide, full of roads that led anywhere. The end. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes kindness can change the world. Tell me in the comments what part hit you the hardest and where in the world you're watching from. Your thoughts keep these stories alive.